some undergraduates in the house? Yeah? That doesn't sound like we do, really. Do we have undergraduates in the house, really? Yeah, we do. Do we have any faculty in the house? Hey, look at that. Wow. Well, welcome to First Gen Run the World. It's sponsored by the College of Arts and Sciences, and I'm Celine Marie Pascal, Associate Dean for Undergraduate Studies in the college. I'm standing in for Dean Peter Starr, who couldn't be here this evening. He's attending a reception at the National Security Council that is honoring his wife, Alice Hill. I know we didn't get stood up for anything shabby, did we? So the numbers of students at AU who are in the first in their families to attend college have doubled since 2010. First-gen students now comprise 11% of the incoming class of AU, and in the College of Arts and Sciences, we have about 24 faculty who are also the first in their families to attend college. Mimi Fittig, who organizes events for the college and organized this event for us this evening, is a first-generation staff member. Well, first-generation college student who is a staff member here. So hello to Mimi and thank you. As someone who was the first generation, the first person in my family to attend college, I was especially happy to be able to introduce another first-gen faculty member, Missys Story, our guest speaker for this evening. Professor Young teaches in the college writing program in the Department of Literature in the College of Arts and Sciences. Her work has appeared in The Atlantic, The Washington Post, Plowshares, Narrative, Poets and Writers, and many other literary journals. Her first novel is forthcoming from Hachette Press. After Professor Young's presentation, I have the privilege of joining her in a discussion with Guillermo Kremer, a senior in the School of International Service, Heaven Lee Sensky, a sophomore in the School of Public Affairs, and Camille Clark, who coordinates the Multicultural and First Generation College Outreach Program for the Center for Diversity and Inclusion. After a short discussion among this group on stage, we'll open the conversation to the floor and look forward to hearing your thoughts, your insights, and your reactions. Please join me in welcoming Missys Story.
You're here. Thank you for coming despite the rain. And thank you to Celine and the College of Arts and Science for believing that first-gen voices really matter and making some space here tonight to celebrate first-generation voices. And to Mimi, I don't see her out there, but she's the one who brought the Beyonce, and I appreciate that. It's good to have some energy. And we're here to celebrate first gens, but we're also here, most importantly, to listen to the panel. Some of these are former students of mine, and I've had the opportunity over the last couple of weeks to get to know them better. And their stories are what are really incredible tonight. So you'll hear more from them soon. More than 20 years ago, I was actually a student in this audience. I was a senior at American University in what was then called the Washington Semester Program. And we lived out at Tenleytown, which is now where the beautiful law school is. So I sat in that very audience as a student 20 years ago. And I came here from Hannibal, Missouri, and my family called it studying abroad from Missouri to Washington, D.C. It seemed like such a foreign place to go. And I really didn't know any better, so I got in my car and drove here, because that's how good Midwesterners travel. We get in our cars and we drive places. And I didn't understand how you could travel in a city without a car. I had grown up on a dirt road. I had never been on a train or a bus, and so I did what I was supposed to do. I got in a car and I drove here. And I brought maps, which used to be like you'd fold them out like this. I brought maps with me and a bag phone. I had a bag phone that I carried over my shoulder, and you plugged it into your cigarette lighter because cars then had cigarette lighters too. So I brought these maps, I brought my car, and I think I brought a lot of guts. And I drove around for quite a while trying to find a parking spot, and that I don't think has really changed here at AU. But I finally found a parking spot, and I realized that I was the only Washington semester student to bring a car. I was it. And I became very popular very quickly because I had a car. I made instant friends. I even met my spouse, who is here tonight with our children. And I also brought proof of that semester. This is us. I know. I know. I know, right? This is about 20 years ago, circa 1996, on the Metro. And you're right, Guillermo, the Metro still looks the same. That hasn't changed at all. We're in matching flannels, of course, as everyone was in the 1990s. And Dr. Young actually teaches here also. So you may have an opportunity to take a class with him when his hair was once as long as mine. And now we're both teachers here at AU. So speaking with you tonight, and especially in this auditorium, really makes the experience as a first-generation student turned first-generation faculty really come full circle. So I'm glad you're here. One thing that I know tonight that I didn't know more than 20 years ago, and I'm not going to tell you exactly how many more than 20 years ago, but it was plenty more than 20 years ago. I didn't really know that I was a first-generation student. And that's true of many first-generation students. We don't always know that we are first-generation students. Even the definition of what it means to be a first-generation student can be confusing. Most research says you're first-gen if neither parent has earned a degree higher than high school. AU says you're first-gen if you're the first in your family to attend college. But CDI says that if you recognize this rocky road and relate with the first-gen experience, you are very welcome. So I like their much more inclusive definition. I wouldn't have understood more than 20 years ago what being a first-gen means to me today. And back then, I didn't know you had to buy your own books. I didn't know what a syllabus was. I'd never heard of a registrar or a bursar. Those seemed like a foreign language to me. And sometimes today they still are. And I had to learn really the hard way how to do college, how to put this together. My family back in Missouri's motto was to do with what you have and don't ask for more. And part of that served me really well, the part of figuring things out and doing with what I had. And the part about not asking for more didn't serve me as well, because I had to learn to ask for a lot more. And I'm still learning to ask for a lot more. You've heard of imposter syndrome, yes? It's real. It feels real right now. It might feel real sitting on the stage. The idea that I still don't quite belong on this path, that I haven't still earned my place, feels very real. And part of that comes from having very humble roots that didn't prepare me for college, but prepared me for life. And part of those humble roots are about chickens. Now, I have to warn you before I share with you this story that you never want to get too attached to chickens. That's your trigger warning. You see, my dad was once paid in chickens. He was a pest control technician in our family's bug business, and he did a roach job for a customer who couldn't pay. So she paid my dad in chickens. She loaded up the back of his truck with about 10 hens and a very, very, very mean rooster. And he brought him home to where we lived out on a dirt road. And he drove up the road, and my brothers and I ran out. It seemed very noisy, and we were very interested in what Dad was bringing home. And my mom was getting ready to go to work herself. My dad worked the day shift, and my mom worked the night shift as a telephone operator, which apparently meant that she would plug things in back when telephones needed that kind of service. So she was getting ready to go to work on the night shift. My dad came home on the day shift. And when she saw what was in the back of Dad's truck, she didn't even blink. That's just another thing he does. He brings home chickens. So she told him to put him in one of the dog pens, hold him till she got home. And the next day, they built a chicken coop out of some lumber they borrowed. And the chickens seemed like an opportunity. We were living out in rural Missouri, and chickens meant fresh eggs every day. So they seemed like a really good idea. My mom was raising us on about $25 a week of a grocery budget and a huge garden in which she grew most of our food. So my brother and we went out and collected the chickens from the coop every morning. We fought with the mean rooster who always tried to get rid of us, and we sold the eggs. We sold them for about $1 a dozen, which seemed like a good deal, but it cost a lot more than $1 a dozen just to feed the chickens, so it ended up not being that great of a deal. And eventually, the chickens took more in grain than they gave in eggs. So my dad went out to our woods and got a tree stump, and he hammered 2 nails in the tree stump, and he stretched their necks, and he chopped the chickens' heads off. And if you've ever seen chickens with their heads chopped off, they run, for some reason, down to water. So they ran down to our pond, and my brothers and I had to go collect the chickens and bring them back to Mom, who immediately boiled them, plucked them, and served them for dinner. And this may explain why I've been a vegetarian ever since. But it was a useful story. We knew how to make things. We knew how to make do. My mom never went to college, but she knew how to turn chickens basically into lemonade. First generation students, we know a lot, like I knew about chickens, but we may not yet know what we need to know for college. And I'm grateful for my family for the values that they taught me. I know how to work hard. I know how to make do. I know how to help people when they need help. I know how to do what you say you're going to do. And I wouldn't trade the things that my family taught me for a degree, but I feel very fortunate that I don't have to. First generation students, we don't always know what we don't know. When we arrive on campus, it really is as if we are studying abroad for the first time. We don't speak the academic language. The flight to get here was very, very turbulent. We've packed all the wrong things, it seems, and there's no itinerary except to somehow figure out how to earn a degree. This is what I thought it would look like moving into college. I was very excited to pack things and get on my way and unpack them into a dorm and have a space of my own for the first time. But we didn't quite understand orientation, so my parents dropped me off 2 days early. It was just me and a very nice RA hanging out for 2 days, waiting for everyone else to arrive. This is closer to what it actually looked like when I was actually moving into my dorm. But let me tell you what we do know. First-gen students are an asset on campus. Nationally, we make up about 30% of undergraduate students. But those numbers are probably much higher because that's data that's pulled from the Common Application. And when you're filling out the Common Application, you don't always self-identify as a first-generation student. In fact, you might not check that box because it might feel a little precarious to do so. So we make up about 30%. And most of these students actually go to community colleges or they go to for-profit universities. Those that enroll in 4-year colleges like AU, we do much better in the long run. The investment is in really the long game, but nobody wants to go home with the debt without the degree. At AU in 2014, as Celine mentioned, 11% identified as first gen. And that's an increase from 9% in 2009, but it's probably much higher is my guess. First gen students are disproportionately Hispanic and African American, more likely to be enrolled part-time and to work full-time. I have had a job since I was probably 14, and I wouldn't know what it was like not to work. So when I arrived at college, I got a job right away. How else was I going to pay for things? First-gen students are also more likely to be economically insecure, which is tough when you're studying and you need to focus on work and you're worried about how to pay your tuition bill. And we're also mostly female. When I applied to college, I knew that my scholarships had to add up to tuition. My parents said they could help with the room and board if I could earn the rest. So the summer before I went to college, I worked 3 jobs, saved up my money, and then by sophomore year, I understood that an RA got their room and board paid. So I applied to be an RA, and I was paid, I think, $100 a month, which was a lot of money. And it was more than we ever made from chickens. My parents were very, very impressed by this deal. First-gen students, we understand the tough roads, and we're very, very familiar with the struggle. We are less likely to graduate. After 6 years nationally, only 11% have earned a degree. And for me, that's a pretty devastating number, because at that point, first-gen students have accrued a lot of debt and don't have a degree to show for it. The good news is at AU, we do a lot better. 82% of our first-gen students graduate within 6 years, mostly because our first-generation students don't always fit in all those other categories. But those stats, as I've learned from this panel, don't actually tell the whole story. I think we need to listen to the whole story. I think we need to find out who our students are and think about them as a whole student from matriculation to graduation. We need to value what the first-gen students bring to our campus. And we need to listen to who they are rather than just tell them where they should go for help. You might be surprised by how many first-gen students you actually already know, or you might recognize this struggle and relate. Justice Sotomayor, first-gen. Elizabeth Warren, where's Sam? First-gen. Michelle Obama, first-gen. And your daily Starbucks cup of coffee, Howard Schultz, he's the CEO of Starbucks, first-generation college student. And Ruth Simmons, she's the 18th president of Brown University. These are good ranks, yes, panel? Yeah, I want you to be among those ranks. Those are good ranks to be in. First-gen students like these are achievers, and we might be more likely to feel grateful. And gratitude is a very good thing, but sometimes it comes with a cost. Maybe too much so. I think we need to silence that voice that says we don't belong, or makes us feel like we're imposters, or tells us that we should keep quiet rather than speak up. First-generation students don't always feel that we are entitled to office hours. And this is something, even as a first-generation faculty member, that I had to figure out, because I couldn't understand why they didn't want my help when I sat in my office alone for a very long time. Until I finally just asked them, why don't you come to my office hours? And my students explained that my office hours were not very convenient for students that had internships in the city, for students that worked. So I started having office hours in the evening when they were back on campus. I started having office hours at Starbucks because they were already there. And I started having office hours on Skype with students that weren't available. We Skyped. It's not weird. I actually have students right now that are in England. I have a whole class of college writing that are in England right now, and we were Skyping this morning during office hours. It may be the first time. It does seem a little awkward, but then it becomes actually very, very convenient. I think we have to meet students where they are. And I think that if we make our office hours more convenient, they will come to us for more help. I think our jobs as faculty and administrators, I think it is service. That's what teaching is to me. It's not the same as customer service, and our students maybe need to know that too, but it is service. First-generation students, we know how to work hard, but we don't always know quite how to lean in. We don't feel entitled to reach into spaces that seem lofty to us. Who am I to think that I can write a book and that I can publish a novel? But we have to give ourselves, I think, permission to do both. First-generation students don't always feel ownership of our campus community. We may feel out of place with continuing generation peers who simply know more things than we do about how the academy works. They understand the language, perhaps, in ways that we don't. Family at home may not relate to this new campus life, and it leads to sometimes a lot of isolation. And that's something that I've recognized in myself, but also noticed in my own first-generation students. We know that when students study in a group, they do better. But when you study in a group, it can be very vulnerable. Right? Immediately, everyone else knows what you do or you do not know. First-generation students are 4 times more likely than their peers not to come back after the first year of college. They may want our help, but they may not know how to find it or how to accept it. On the first day of class, that long list of resources that we all list on our syllabus, I tell my students that that list of resources are included. You can have as many of those things as you want. You can go to the Writing Center, you can go to the Counseling Center, you can go to CDI, you can go to the library. This stuff's just included. And I didn't know that. I thought the Writing Center tutoring would be extra, and I knew I couldn't afford it, so I didn't go. And I thought some of those other resources listed sounded pretty good, but were going to be something that I wouldn't have access to. And I couldn't necessarily call home to tell my folks that, because they wouldn't have known perhaps how to help me either, except to tell me just to keep working hard. That was their answer to most of my questions, which is pretty good advice, and it did serve me well. But first-generation students like me, we experience sometimes imposter syndrome, which means sometimes we fake it. And sometimes when we fake it, we make mistakes. And I know that as a faculty member as well as a student. And I almost made a really big mistake that actually changed the course of my career and made me decide to become a college writing professor. Because first-gen students, we may not really understand plagiarism. We know what we may not know what it is. We know you're not supposed to copy things straight from the internet. And we know it's bad and we shouldn't do it. But like many students, I really didn't quite understand what plagiarism was. And I came very dangerously close to finding out. My sophomore year, I was in my dorm room, and I remember it was a Sunday afternoon. It was right before spring break. And my history professor, Dr. Cordery, called me. We had dorms with phones in them then. And my phone rang, and it was Dr. Cordery, and she said, "I'm going over your paper, and I want you to bring all your notes, your books, every single thing that you used to write this paper, and I want you to be in my office in 10 minutes. This was a Sunday afternoon. So I ran over to Dr. Cordery's office, and I knocked on the door, and she just pointed to a chair and said, "Sit," as she often did. She was very, very efficient. She told me to sit down, and she asked me to show her my process. How did I put things together? Where did I find my sources? How did I organize it? She asked me to show me how I had put this paper together. And she pointed out to me how I had transcribed notes much too close and incorrectly, how I'd summarized sources too close to the original, how I'd cited authors without following any documentation style, because apparently you're supposed to have a documentation style, which I didn't know. Basically, she said, "You have no idea how to write for college." And it was pretty devastating to learn that, because I thought I was sort of pulling it off. I thought I was sort of faking it enough that people didn't know how much I didn't know. I was 17 years old, and I'd never written more than a few paragraphs in my high school. I'd never done research in an actual database. Most of the drafts that I had produced were still handwritten first drafts. And in my rural community, they were preparing us for the workforce, not for college. So it was good enough for me to earn A's. But most of my teachers knew my family. They knew our bug business. They knew that I would probably go into the bug business and become a fourth-generation bug girl. And so that's the road that they were preparing me for. And so the idea that I didn't know how to write for college wasn't all that shocking. But it was shocking once I got to college, and I was suddenly supposed to know. So I walked back to my dorm room pretty ashamed and very frustrated and extremely grateful, because Dr. Cordery could have turned me in for plagiarism. She could have failed me for the class. But instead, she sought the root cause. She wanted to know what had went wrong in my education so that she could figure out how to teach me not to make the same mistakes. And she gave me a book on how to write for college. And I went to the library, and I studied it for hours, and I found out about essay structures and these things called thesis statements and rhetorical arguments and how to outline a paper and cite research. And I was a very fast learner. But my lack of basic skills is pretty common among first-generation students. Most of us enter college with lower GPAs, and we need at least one remedial class just to catch up. And as faculty, I think we need to be more patient with what they come to us not necessarily knowing, like Dr. Cordery did, and meet them closer to where they are. There isn't a skill in my class that you need to know that is beneath me to teach. I teach writing and I teach introduction to research skills because I know what it feels like to come to college and not have those skills. And I was embarrassed by how close I'd almost come to failing. And it took me a long time to catch up. The stakes were high. I wanted to make my family proud, and I wanted to do it on my own. And first-generation students, we understand this type of independence. We're very, very proud. But we're also very resourceful, right? But we do study alone. And it would probably be better if we reached out a little bit more. If I had studied in my dorm's lounge with my peers, they would have known that I knew more about chickens than I knew about annotated bibliographies. But because sometimes we don't know more, it makes us a little bit more open to some uncertain paths. We switch majors a lot more than our peers. And I think it's okay to do so. First-generation students, we often need to try things on to figure out if they fit or not. As a first-year student, I pledged myself to the business school. I thought it made sense. I grew up in a family business. I knew how to do whatever the job was to make customers happy. And I thought that was a good path. It made a lot of sense for my future. My mom ran the books for our company, and she made balancing ledgers look very easy, and it isn't at all. And I found that out in my very first accounting class, and then I immediately dropped that major. Then I became a government major, because I like to talk about politics. Then I took some classes in literature, because I like to read, and I went into the bookstore, and I would walk the aisles and basically choose my classes based on the books that looked interesting to read. And so one day I accidentally found myself in a Russian cultural history class, and I realized pretty quickly that most of the other students that were in the class were upperclassmen. They knew what they were doing, and I clearly wasn't supposed to be there. But I was too embarrassed to raise my hand and say, like, oh, I'm really in the wrong class. And then I became completely fascinated by the world that seemed so different than mine. So it made sense to me. I just switched my majors rather than tell anyone I wasn't supposed to be in the class. I didn't mind stumbling around in the dark of different majors. In college, I learned how to think. And I learned to ask questions. And I'm still learning to be okay without easy answers. I think critical thinking is more valuable than any major. When first-year students tell me that they're undecided, there's always that moment where you're supposed to tell people what your major is, and often students don't know. I think it's courageous not to know. First-generation students rub elbows with continuing gen peers that have pretty clear paths, students that may feel more comfortable with their futures, and they may have networks much larger that can help them get jobs after graduation. There weren't a lot of books in my home growing up, but we had a lot of stories. My family's always told a lot of stories. And the thing I knew I wanted to do was tell more stories, and I wanted to teach other people how to tell their stories. But I had to try on a lot of majors that didn't fit in order to find one that did. And first-generation students, we know how to be flexible. We know how to bounce back. We know how to keep knocking on doors until someone opens one. And as faculty, I think we need to be more flexible with them also. The day that first-generation students arrive in our classroom has not leveled the playing field at all. Arriving in our classroom is really only half of the struggle. Being flexible with them, being helpful with them, doesn't mean that they're getting any special treatment. It does not mean that I'm going to sit in office hours and listen to complaints about roommates or the bad food in TDR. But it does mean that I'll remember to post scholarship links to our Facebook group. It means that I will send out more Blackboard announcements about internships, especially if they are paid internships, because it's a real privilege to take an unpaid internship. I'll send out Blackboard messages encouraging students to submit their work to essay contests. I'll email a student directly just to check in. I know that as first-gen students, we often underuse all of these resources that are available to us, like the Writing Center, the library, CDI, campus events. I will invite, encourage, and sometimes require students to come to campus events. I see a few faces out there that may have been unwilling participants. I'm glad you're here. I had to learn the hard way how to do college, but I think that I can help my students, especially the first-generation ones, have a much smoother path so that they can focus on much bigger goals in life. I think we need to clear their bureaucratic path. I think that we need to cheer them on rather than stand in their way. First-generation students, we know how to take risks. and we know how to dream really big. I've had a dream since I was about 6 years old to be a writer. And I'm excited to share with you tonight that my dream is coming true. I've always been a writer, but I'm about to be a published author with my first novel coming out. And I want to share my original cover design with you for the first book I ever wrote. It's good work. And you do not have permission to call me Missy, okay, from now on. That unicorn, that's good work. I stand by that work. Now, that's not the real cover of my forthcoming novel, but I still think it's good work. I thought when you wanted to be a writer, it was a pretty simple thing. You just wrote a book, and you made a cover, and you shared it with readers, and that was what it meant to be a writer. Or in my case, you passed it around among your 27 first cousins and charged them each a penny. And that's how you made a living as a writer. And the dream seemed very achievable until my dream got a lot bigger. I had a lot of success and a lot of failure along the path, but I was used to that as a first-generation student. 5 years and 20 full manuscripts later, I have something even bigger. You want to see the real cover, don't you? Ooh, I know. I didn't do the artwork on this one. Luckily now I have professionals to do the artwork for me. But what I've learned from achieving this dream is that first-generation faculty, we don't always know what we don't know either. And we're here to listen to you. Sharing our experiences as a first-generation faculty member may feel precarious, right? It may feel even political. You can't tell that I'm a first-generation faculty member just by looking at me. I have to actually self-identify. And sometimes that may feel a little unsafe to do so. We may still feel like we're sort of imposters, that we don't quite belong here. But less than 1% of first-gen students actually go on to earn terminal degrees. So I think we belong here. And I think we're here, and we're here to help. So I've told you enough of my story, and I want to hear from our panelists now. So we're going to start with Guillermo. And you probably know me well enough to know that I don't like boring Q&As, so we're going to start with 2 truths and a lie. Because that's my favorite game to play in the classroom. You've probably already figured out what the rules are for 2 truths and a lie. It's 2 truths and a lie. Okay. All right, Guillermo, you're going to start.
Okay, great. Hey, everyone, I'm Guillermo. So, 2 truths and a lie in the morning. Okay, I went to private school on a full scholarship for high school. I have never had an issue with financial aid. And what was my other one? And the other one that I have is I have been working at least 20-hour weeks on top of full-time since I moved out of the house.
Which one is his lie?
I bet the audience could guess.
You think so?
I think everyone can figure it out.
So my first one is that I'm the first in my family to go to college on my mom's entire side and my dad's entire side. My second one is that I originally committed to a state school in Pennsylvania, where I'm from, because I didn't think that I could ever get a loan out large enough to go to a school like AU. And my third one is that when I was 17, my parents signed waivers so that I could patient escort at Planned Parenthood, and I did that. What do you think?
Planned Parenthood one?
No, that one's true.
Which one, Guillermo?
Well, the Planned Parenthood one is true, I guess.
Oh, okay.
That one's true.
Okay.
So the lie was that I'm the first woman in my entire family, including distant relatives, to ever go to college, but there was
Okay.
a couple of men that have gone.
Very cool.
Well done.
Okay, so one is I spent 11 years at the University of Kansas. Another is that my dad had some college. And my last one, I did work as an ambassador. I wanted to share my experiences as a first gen with other first gens, and particularly those who are students of color. And as an ambassador, we have to walk backwards and, point things out along the way. And on my first tour, or one of my first tours, I walked down stairs backwards, and I fell and I rolled.
That one's totally true.
That's completely true.
It's fun.
No, you made that one up. Well, I'm a little relieved. I didn't want that to happen.
Yeah.
I thought it was too funny to be
11 years.
11 years, yeah. So I'm from Kansas City, Kansas originally. The University of Kansas is about 45 or so minutes away. So I did my undergrad there, I did my graduate work, and my professional work there. So everything was in Kansas. I never left. And this is actually my first month and a half here at American University.
For those of you who thought she was a student, I thought the same thing when I first met her. She looks like she's 18, so.
Celine?
I was encouraged to go to college by a high school teacher who thought I had talent. I worked 2 jobs through college, and I graduated from college early.
I bet you worked 3 jobs in college.
You graduated early?
I did.
So
It wasn't a high school teacher.
Is the high school teacher.
Who
I
encouraged
learned
you?
about college from one of the, when my brother was 16, he dated a girl in high school who told me that there was a way to get out of the house without getting married. And my dream of college began.
Great.
That's good advice.
Yeah, it worked for me.
So I also want to hear from you about something that you didn't know before you came to American University that you do know now about being a first-generation student.
It's okay to fail. I think that's a struggle every student has, but in particular first-generation students, because we come in thinking we have to succeed, and if we fail, we're not meant to be here.
They'll take it all away.
And forget about financial aid. But you really need to make sure that you know that failing is okay. I'm not going to say it's encouraged, but it's okay. You'll make it.
I'd like to just say everything. So when I got here, I thought the hard part was over, right? I thought getting in, you look at the numbers, no one's ever left my hometown. No one ever left Pennsylvania. How could I go out of state? How could I do this? That seemed like the hard part. And then I got here and I was so blindsided, right? I had no idea what to ask. And also a good conversation that I know we've had before is it's not only that you don't know what to ask, but you don't know what's okay to ask, right? You might feel like your questions are dumb, or you don't know how to advocate for yourself, right? So as students who likely receive high amounts of financial aid and already feel like we're getting a lucky draw, like we drew the lucky straw, right? And if we argue, then they'll take it away, right? So the biggest thing is that I didn't know how to advocate for myself in any form, especially in financial aid, right?
Yeah.
So if I wasn't getting what I deserved, I was too afraid to speak up because what if they take it away? I already am not supposed to be here. Like this is already a lucky draw. So I think that was the biggest part, and that really stretched out in all aspects of my time here, right? Academics.
And I think your term, lucky, is a key word that first-generation students have integrated in their system, is this concept that we are lucky. We are lucky to have gotten out. We are lucky to be here. That's not necessarily true.
Right, we worked hard to get here.
We worked hard. We still work hard. And I don't think we give ourselves enough credit.
It's hard to give yourself credit as a person who's struggling here, but calling home and hearing how they're struggling at home, right?
Right.
So it's like, oh, I have it easy. I'm supposed to have it easy. That I'm in college. I have meal swipes.
Right.
I'm not going to go hungry. I can go eat chicken fingers 10 times a day and it'll be great. But then I call home And you have all this weight on your shoulders of like all these things that are happening financially and academically, and you're playing catch up. You all constantly feel like you're playing catch up. But then you call home and it's like, we are lucky, because they're the ones that are struggling, right? They're the ones that are struggling, not me. How could I complain about, how could I feel like I'm struggling?
Right.
Because I do feel lucky, you know, and I know that I'm privileged for being here, right? You know, but what's the difference between accepting your privilege and feeling like all of it's luck? Is that the same thing?
And Celine, you've mentioned before the idea of that home may feel that we are in some ways saying, rejecting, right? That perhaps that's a tough line to walk also.
That's a very tough line between, I have often said that when I was a student, I felt like everything I learned was building a brick wall between me and my family, because the lines of communication were no longer, kind of like you were saying, Heavenly, about it was so different at home than it is at school. You can't really share that.
Yeah.
And I think that I can say, even as a first generation, that has followed me as a professor, that there are so many cultural aspects that come with academic life that I'm still learning. I still misstep. I still do things that make people look at me like, really? You just
On
said
both
that?
ends, on both aspects of your life, right?
Yeah.
So for me, one of the biggest parts my freshman year, I'm getting a little bit better at it though, was that I didn't feel like I fit in here. Like I was a lot different than my peers, it seemed like. But then I would go home
You'd feel
and I would
different.
feel so different at home,
Right.
right? So where did I fit in? I was like this box, like in between two worlds. It really is a different world.
Yeah.
And that was really difficult. And then you have family members, I'm sure that you all can attest, that love me to death, but also were intimidated by me, right? They were afraid that I thought that I was better than them, or that as much as I always try not to act that way, I try not to be condescending, but I'm growing here, right? I'm changing. I can look at some of the things that are going back home and feel like they're not the right things, right? And I can look at the children and encourage them to follow my path and not their parents. So that's difficult, because a lot of those adults in my life that got me to where I am certainly feel a little bit
Judged.
judged. Like when I look at the kids and say, oh no, you can go to college. I'm gonna get you to college, right? I'm gonna make sure that you get to college. And then their parents are like, well, we're happy, like
And I think
we're alive.
it's especially big with first generation individuals who have to hop on a plane to come here. This concept that you can't just go home. Going home for Thanksgiving isn't an option for a lot of first generation students. And it's not because we don't want to, it's because we can't. This concept of going home because we get 3 days off and then we come back for a week and a half. It's like, I'm not gonna blow $350 on a plane ticket when I could just wait. But yeah, I mean, I guess that the travel aspect of it, it already puts you in a different category. And in particular with family members, you have cousins who have gone to college as well, but don't have to get on a plane to do it, so they don't get you.
And I just like to push too that it's not just financial.
Right.
Right. It's beyond finances. It's when your peers are calling home for academic support, right? My mom's just making sure that I eat this week, that I have money to buy deodorant, right? That was my whole life. They didn't have baskets to throw, eggs to throw in a basket for me to get extra tutoring if I needed, they never looked at my report card. I was passing. They didn't have to worry about it, right?
Yeah, and they don't always understand, some of the things that you do and the activities that you do in college. And so something that you think is huge, maybe getting a leadership position or, being in a club, they're not really understanding that's a big deal, congratulations on that. And so I think there's a lot of explaining around, this is what I'm doing, and this is, this is a good thing, and it's big, it's big for me.
What's one thing that you would want your peers to know?
First generation peers or non-first generation peers? Because there's a difference.
Oh, could we do both?
Yeah, do both.
I mean, like I said, with my first generation peers, I guess it's like, it's okay to have this conversation. I think like you said, first generation students study by themselves. First generation students just do life by themselves for some reason. And I, I'm totally guilty of this. But it's cool to like reach out to a peer and to just be honest about it, you know? But to non-first generation peers, don't assume things. It's just not, it's not cool. It's not something you should do. Like, you can't just assume that, oh, he's not going home because he doesn't want to. Like, no, I really want to go home. It's just not that cheap. Or like, I don't know, certain things. Like, like finding a tutor, stuff like that. It's just, don't assume. It's not cool. It's not great.
That's probably good advice for everyone.
Right.
What about you, Camille?
So, speaking to fellow first-gen peers, I would say nobody really tells you how much you're going to advocate for yourself when you get to college. And that's a tough thing to do, definitely, and maybe not something that you're always prepared for. That doubles if you are a student of color, if you're a woman, if you're an international student, if you're LGBT, particularly trans and non-binary students, if you are living with a physical disability or a mental disability, like, you're gonna have to fight even harder. And there's just some things at college that you're gonna have to fight for. And, if there's something that doesn't feel right for you, definitely speak up about that. In general, I would just say language around college is very confusing. Like you mentioned, I didn't know what a registrar was. I don't think I knew what that office did until maybe toward the end of my sophomore year. I mean, I had no idea. I think that there are a lot of assumptions to be made, and a lot of folks think that, college is like the leveling ground, and that everybody is taking off running from the same place. And that's not necessarily true. I think about my grad school experience and how that language is still confusing. I had a professor a few weeks into class say, okay, you're gonna do an annotated bibliography for class and it's due in 3 weeks. I had no idea what that was, and I was thinking, I'm in grad school, I'm supposed to know these things, so I'm not gonna ask. I was totally uncomfortable and tried to wing it, and it didn't turn out very well. So again, definitely ask for help even though it feels uncomfortable. But yeah, that language, professor assumed everybody knows what that meant. Even as a staff member, being fairly new at American, I was looking at resources and things that I can suggest to my students, and even the language around that is unclear. I am a 6.5-year professional in the world of higher ed, and that stuff's still confusing to me, so I can only imagine how confusing it is to students. And so I think there's a lot that needs to be done around, making some of that jargon clearer.
Diversity versus inclusion.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
we're here, they
Yeah.
have us on the numbers,
Yeah,
but are we getting what we need to be here? right?
exactly.
I want to give a shout out to Sarah McKinley, who was going to be on our panel this evening and isn't because she had a family emergency. So I just want to recognize that's, again, another pressure that all students face, and I think was really poignant when we lost somebody from this group who had meant so much to us. So she's here in spirit with us this evening. Now, I guess that I would say, for me, if I were going to say one thing to both groups, and it would be that there's a really big difference between being intelligent and being educated, and that you can be incredibly smart and have a 6th grade education, and that it's really important to be able to recognize that distinction. And you could be incredibly smart and be doing poorly in college because you haven't been trained in the formal structures of how things work here.
I think that one of the big things that I would want other first-gen students to know, that it's okay to tell your story, right? You don't need to be ashamed of where you came from or that you don't really know what's going on. You know, it's okay to make that clear. And also that to students who, you know, aren't first gen, just try and not make assumptions, I think is a huge part. Definitely don't try not to make assumptions. And we all make assumptions, right? Making, you know, it doesn't make you a bad person, but just try to be aware of it.
Celine, what do you know as a first-gen faculty member or admin that you didn't know perhaps before?
Oh my gosh.
Everything?
There isn't enough time. What do I know that I didn't know as a faculty? I didn't understand mentorship. Someone asked me fairly recently, who did I seek out for mentors? And I was sort of taken aback because I've never really had a mentor in my life. And that surprises me. I'm an associate dean. You would have thought that somewhere along the way I would have stepped to that, but I didn't. And I had to think about why was it that I hadn't sought a mentor. And some of it was that I think I was so working hard, right? As you have all said, you work really hard. And I felt like a fake. And I just thought you just had to buckle up and do it. It never occurred to me that there were people who wanted to help. And then I cultivated a bit of stubbornness to get through, which might have made it harder for people to help me if they wanted to. But I guess I would also like to say, and I suspect that we all feel this way, a big thank you for coming forward as a first-gen faculty to do this, because I know that for many faculty who have this experience, they feel intimidated about sharing with peers that they are first generation because of judgments that people have about our families or about our capacity. So thanks for opening the door for so many people tonight.
I'm afraid they're all going to remember me as the woman who told a story about a chicken.
Might be.
They're going to cluck at me as I walk across campus.
Would you like to open the discussion to the audience? Would you like to join in on this conversation a little bit? Yeah, I think so. We have mics on both sides of the aisle. Please.
You probably can. I'll repeat it for you if you want. You can stay there.
I was just going to ask, like, if any of you experienced any, like, discrimination when you were going to college from, like, your family? Because I know, like, my parents have always been supportive and they've always wanted better for me than they got and better for me than they thought they could give me. But as far as, like, some of my extended family, it was an idea of, like, why are you wasting so much money? Like, your parents have worked so hard and they don't have the ability to do this for you, and why aren't you going to community college and some of that. So if any of you guys have experienced that, is there any way you can, like, deal with that?
So the question is whether or not going home is easy, or whether or not we've experienced
I
discrimination.
feel like the both of us will say yes. And I think it's this concept that, like, we're kind of going above and beyond. And it's one of those things where you have to remind yourself that you do belong here. But yes, I have faced that. Now, my cousins love me, but there is that sense of you were the one who moved away.
You left
And
us.
you left us, and that's not true. And the worst part that I had to face was my mom feeling that, this concept that you did leave. You know, you did have the choice to go to state school, but you decided to go 8 hours away. And I have a younger sister who goes here as well. And so the biggest thing that I tell her is, sometimes you really just have to rub it off. You have to realize that your decision is yours, and it was an important one, and it'll pay off. You know, the
For
hope
you
is
and
that,
your
yeah,
family,
for you and your
right?
family. You know,
Not
the hope
just
is
you.
that you're taking your family here.
You're paving the way.
Yeah, and so, you know, you've got kids one day, and you're going to do the same you'll have them, and you'll say the same things. And I'm sure one day my cousins will realize that it was for the best. But my biggest advice is to just kind of keep your head up high and don't let that bring you down, because it'll happen. I mean, Thanksgiving, Christmas, that's not easy, because it's just this like, so you're gone now, you don't know what's going on, you haven't been at the family parties. I know.
You only come back at the good times.
Yeah,
and
you
you're
only
not
come
there
back for the
bad.
good times, and it's like,
Right.
yeah, okay, like, let's drop it.
Yeah. So mine's a little bit similar. My story is a little bit of a mixed bag, right? So I had a similar story like Guillermo. My parents wanted me to commit a half hour away, right? My dad's a quadriplegic. He can't use his hands or his legs. My mom is very young. She's only 37. And she takes care of him full time, right? So when I went to college, when she was working at night at Walmart as a cashier, I was at home with my dad, taking care of him physically and cooking dinner. And I left. And I left a far ways away, right? I didn't just go to that state school. I didn't want to. And I battle that guilt every day. I wonder if there will ever be a day where I will genuinely feel guilt-free for abandoning my family, right? They want me to be here, obviously. They want the best for me. My mom did not give up her whole life, and my dad did not power through getting hurt when he was 23 to watch me struggle the way they did. And they know that, right? But it's still hard, and every day is dark. And I still feel every single day, did my dad drop the phone tonight? Is he okay? How's my mom, right? Sometimes I purposely don't call because I have a few hours where I'm like, fine, right? So we have a mixed bag. I told my family that I had withdrew from the state school. After I made a deposit, I withdrew, and I applied to DC schools. Obviously, I'm very involved with public advocacy and things like that because of my father, right? I want to help people. I told my parents that I withdrew and that I was going to DC because if I didn't do it now, I'd never leave. And in my senior pictures, I told them that as we were walking down the 50-yard line. I was a cheerleader in high school. Both of them are crying. And they're not happy. They're terrified, right? When you are a part, and especially coming from low-income families, you're a part of that, right? You're a cohort. You don't leave. You're a part of the whole, not the singular, right? My family knows that I'm doing what's best for the children and I'm paving the way for the future, but it's still a struggle every day, and there's a lot of people that are making a lot of sacrifices for me to be here. That's a lot of pressure, right?
And
Questions? Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, I am first gen undergrad and graduate, both sides of my family.
Yay.
First one. And one of the things that always rubbed me the wrong way, and I hear repeated from a lot of my peers currently, I live in the dorms, so I have a lot of peers in SIS and across COGOs and across the school, is what resources or programs are out there for faculty in how to deal with first gens. Because we can say a lot about, like, it's our duty to, like, educate, like, you need to stop feeling like you're lucky, but at the end of the day, if I go to a professor and I say, I just don't understand, and their response is, just work harder, that doesn't help anybody. So what's going on that side as well?
So I feel like a part of that is my job. I am actually going to be doing some work around presentations. I think for faculty and staff. Sarah's in the audience, that's my boss. But for faculty and staff on how to work with first gens, I think that is so important, that's so huge. And again, they're making a lot of assumptions, you know, both faculty and staff. You know, something that I had been thinking about, I work with some scholarship students. I purchase books for students, and these students need tons of books for class, for one. For two, I think it's really important for faculty to think about access and the accessibility of your class. So are you using an access code in a textbook that has to be purchased brand new?
oh my God.
I had a lot of trouble with access codes. But just really understanding that, you know, everybody doesn't have, you know, the same amount of money in classes. saying things like, just work harder, you're not really looking at the student as a whole. You're not thinking about what they're doing. You're not thinking about if they're working, maybe multiple jobs. You're just, making this assumption that everybody's in the same place and everybody is starting from the same place, and that's totally wrong. And so my hope is to be able to work with both faculty and staff about removing some of those biases and really understanding how they can work better with first-gen students.
I find that most of the things as a faculty member that I do to accommodate, to lift up, to identify first-generation students, it's just good teaching. It helps all of my students when I'm really clear with assignments. It helps all of my students when I post every single thing to Blackboard. It helps all of my students when I have a Facebook group and I collect them all in one place and then I bug them and send them announcements. I think it helps every student because the struggles that a first-year student here may face are very similar to a first-year student who's first generation, trying to understand the academic language, trying to navigate and learn how to advocate. I think those things apply to everybody.
And there is currently a workshop that the Center for Diversity and Inclusion offers called Paving the Way, and it's all about first-generation students. So if you're in the audience and you know somebody that might identify or you want to continue that conversation, students and staff are welcome to attend that workshop for free. And that's really helpful.
And I think one final advice that I would add for faculty in general is you really should believe your students. It's this concept that we're probably not making up our excuse as to why your assignment isn't ready or why I can't do the 3:30 deadline that you have asked for.
Right.
There is a reason. I am not making this up. Just, if you really have questions, ask me about it. But don't jump to conclusions. But yeah, I mean, faculty overall, I've noticed are pretty approachable and stuff. But sometimes, those clickers that you have to buy just because the teacher doesn't want to take attendance on a piece of paper,
I had never
that's
even heard of this.
unacceptable.
Yeah.
Come on, I'm not spending an additional $25.
25.
Or whatever it
That's a
is,
deal.
so that you know that I'm in class, when I could just sign in or stuff. So it's nice to look at the overall picture. I shouldn't have to be paying so much more money per class.
And you're entitled to that voice as a student here, right? You're entitled to say, this isn't okay, right? And if your professor isn't being receptive of that, there are other outlets for you to take that.
I'd like to point out something else that's happening, and that is that we have within the College of Arts and Sciences and now more broadly at AU a group of faculty who were first-generation college students, first in their families, who are getting together to talk with each other to kind of better understand our own experiences and then to help other faculty understand how to relate to and identify first in their family students in the classroom. We have two panels coming up in the Ann Fair and Teaching Conference to help faculty learn how to better identify and support students. And three of those faculty are here, Noemi Echentagwe, Nuria Villanova, and Kendra Salwa, my apologies. So hats off to you for being part of that effort to help educate the community about the kinds of needs that students have. And I would like to say that as a faculty who has had a first-gen experience all the way through, I think I've been bad in classrooms at recognizing what's going on with students, because when you have 35 students in a classroom, you have two classrooms, there's a pressure of a standard unit student, right? And that all the variation that constitutes a student's life takes time. You have to slow down. And as Melissa said, good teaching requires that you slow down and you don't look for the standard unit student. You look for people and you develop those relationships. And in that process, sometimes you learn things about your teaching, your subject, and yourself that you wouldn't have encountered. And those are really fabulous moments.
My name is Rabia. I'm also a first-generation student. It's my freshman year. And I was wondering, how do you break out of that shell? Earlier you guys mentioned that, when you come here, you have a lot of pressure put on you. You have to be successful, what your parents constitute as successful. And you just have to be, you're the example that is set for everyone else. And
Find your voice, right? I mean, I struggled my first semester making relationships with peers and making friendships, and it wasn't until I accepted the fact that I needed to share a little bit about myself, right? I needed to explain why I went home so much. I needed them to know what I was struggling with and what weight was on me from back home for me to develop those relationships. And, you know, I needed to share those things too, and I needed an outlet, and it worked, right? I have friends in the audience today that are really supportive of me, and I didn't know that that could happen for me, right? Because I had such a different background. But, you know, just trust in your people, right? You know, the right people that you want to be friends with and you want to have relationships with will be there for you, right? And that goes for faculty and staff too. Find your voice with them, you know, advocate for yourself. It's hard, right? But for the most part, your professors want to help you. You know, they don't want to see you fail or struggle.
And I would elaborate on that by just saying, like, additionally, just get comfortable with your voice. Your voice is okay. You know, your story is fine. You know, like, I think we tend to, as first generation students, tend to kind of shy away because we don't want to tell our story, or we're afraid to tell our story because we don't want to be judged.
Right, like our story would discredit us in some way.
Right, and I think it's that concept that your friends will be there through thick and thin. Like, they are true friends, and you really make those friends here in college. I mean, as a senior, like, you know, I've seen people come and go, but, like, you know, I mean, I met one of you, like, you know, welcome week, and it's been 4 years later. You know, it's possible, and so you'll break out of that once you're comfortable with yourself, once you realize that you belong here, you matter, and your story is who you are.
It gets better. Just know that, right? It's hard right now. It's hard for us too, but it does get better, right? You just got to keep on keeping on.
I think a lot about, you mentioned the pressure and the familial pressure, and, you know, setting an example. Know that it's okay to make a mistake. I mean, Guillermo said it's okay to fail. I was terrified of making mistakes. You know, I wanted to be that, and I'm an only child, but I wanted to be that beacon, that poster kid that, you know, my parents, you know, couldn't go to college, and, you know, they're putting all of their hopes and dreams into me, and, you know, they're trying to lift me up, you know. But know that it's okay to fail. It's gonna happen. It's a part of college experience. You know, sit down, think about how you can bounce back from it. You usually can. There is help all around. I had a really good relationship with my advisor. So if you can find, you know, one mentor or a good group of people that can kind of lift you up, you know, as you fall, that's going to help so much.
And nobody knows everything,
Yeah.
right? You might have that feeling that the people around you may know something, but the truth is, fake it till you make it.
Especially
right?
as a freshman.
Everybody's faking it till they
Yeah,
make it.
especially
Even
as a freshman.
your professors, right? Fake it till you make it. Best advice anybody ever gave me.
I think I would add into this that sometimes when you're a first-generation student in your first year, some of your greatest successes are huge disappointments to your family. They're disappointed because you're not there. They're disappointed because of the choices you're making. My own family was really disappointed because the money that I would have earned and contributed to the family income was now going to my college education. And my mother wanted me to be able to send money home when I was working 2 jobs to be able to stay in college. And it felt like a fight for survival, that I had to be able to make a decision either to support my education or to support her. And that was a really painful thing. So there are a lot of choice points along the way where you have to take your own side. And I think I heard both Guillermo and Heavenly and Camille say something to that effect, that part of the college experience is learning to figure out who you are and be in your own shoes, take your own side of things, and to trust that people will love you through it.
As I
Might be
mentioned,
bumpy.
I tried a lot of things on. and I did a lot of things that I found didn't fit. I thought I wanted to go to law school because I didn't know you could do anything but be a lawyer or a doctor. I didn't grow up in a family in which people talked about careers. That wasn't a thing people had. People had jobs, and people figured out how to put food on the table, and that's what you did. The idea of having a choice in it didn't occur to me. So I went to college thinking, well, I could do business because my family had this small business, and I understood that. Or I could be a lawyer, and so I did an internship in a prosecutor's office, and I learned within about 2 minutes that I didn't want to be a lawyer. I didn't enjoy paperwork. I didn't want to be at a desk. I wanted a job that was much more dynamic. But no one in my family had been to college, and so I didn't know any teachers in that way. I think if I could look back on the first year student I was, I would probably tell her to study education because that's what I love, is being in a classroom. But I had to try on so many internships that didn't fit. And those felt like maybe small failures along the way. I went and spent a summer at the Missouri State Archives because I had a history degree that I was lying to my parents about. I had not told them that I was a history major because that seems completely impractical. And so I did an internship at the archives thinking that I might become an archivist. And I learned that I didn't like that either. I kept trying different things that didn't fit. And I wasn't even very good at it. And so I went to my boss at the archives and said, this isn't, I don't, And so they sent me out on the floor to help people trace genealogies. And I loved it because someone would come to me with a problem and I could teach them how to find the answer. And I think teaching is very similar in that way. When students come in, it's almost diagnostic. Like, oh, you don't know how to do an annotated bibliography? I just learned that. I know how to do that. And so part of it, I think, is, for me, is figuring out the things that made me happy versus the things that I thought I was supposed to do, but really didn't make me very happy. And each of those, I think, failures were really successes. They didn't feel that way at the time, though.
As we wrap up for the evening, I want to give a shout out to somebody I think of as one of our own. Think of first generation college students. We take many different paths, and I'm really pleased that tonight we have Vice President of Campus Life, Gail Hansen, who is herself first generation college student in the house. So thank you, Gail. So many thanks to all of you who are not first generation, who came out tonight to support all of us, to learn about the first generation experience. And the one thing that I hope we can all take away, maybe we each have a little takeaway we'd like to, what's the one thing you want the audience to take away? For me, it is that for all of you who are first in your family to go to college, to find a source of pride in that identity. It's a hard thing sometimes to own in an environment where so many people have always expected to be here and maybe you were never intended to be here. But you're here, you're welcome to be here, you deserve to be here, and your story has a unique quality that will enable you to become exactly the person that you are, right? You can't be someone else, and so fully embracing who you are will get you farther down the road than trying to pretend to be somebody else. So maybe Camille, you have something you want to leave them with?
I would say know that you have somebody in your corner. Know that you have the Center for Diversity and Inclusion in your corner. My job is First Gens, and so I am more than happy to talk with you to get your story. I love to get stories, but really help you to walk through this process. And so know that I'm here for that. I'm in the Mary Graydon Center. We have two sides. We have 201 and 202, and I'm in the 202 side. So definitely come chat with me. If there's anything that you need, let me know.
So my takeaway would be that it wasn't luck, that you earned it, and to keep on keeping on even when it's hard, because it'll pay off. I also work in the Center for Diversity and Inclusion, so if anybody would like to carry on a conversation or would like a friend, I'll be there most of the time.
Mine would be to not take no as an answer. Don't let someone stop you. whether it's family or problems or teachers or financial aid. Don't take no for an answer, because that's not going to work for us.
Think of your life as one big appeal.
I'm so honored to tell my story. Thanks for listening. I think my one takeaway as a faculty member would be to expect more out of my students, not less, because they're first generation. That would be my big takeaway.
Okay. Thank you all very much.
Thanks
Thank
for
you to
coming.
the audience for coming.